This one's for y'all. Yeah. One day I was in the studio, just singing to my radio. I was off work, so I had to drink some of my sister. And don't judge me, cause I won't be listening. So I started humming this melody. So I started humming this melody. Then I started humming and drinking and singing this melody. I started watching the YouTube and something. Hey, I was like, damn. What's up, y'all? Welcome back, honey. Hey, Jason. Welcome, Jason. Hey, Firefly. Hey, Kelly. Hey, Sarkono. What a new Sean. Yes, it is. 5 8 days. Once for y'all. One day I was in the studio, just singing to my radio. I was off for work, so I had to drink some of my sister. And don't judge me, cause I won't be listening. So I started humming. Hey, hey, twin. So I started humming this melody. I put my robe on. I got chills. Then I started drinking. Hey, yes, we are back, honey. I was like, damn, I really like this shit. Call me a fan. I'm about to write some shit for them. Hey, Floaty. Yes, court is in session, honey. Court is in session. Yes, honey, court is in session. Now, y'all know this type of stuff right here is right up my alley because you cannot tell me that I am not a real news reporter. Okay, so since I am very much so a very qualified news reporter, I not only stay abreast of what's happening over here in the beef sector, but we also keep up with what is going on in the world. Now, I have been watching every single day of the Derek Chauvin trial and this matter with him and George Floyd. And I have to tell you, this stuff is something else. It's not as cut and dry as you would think it is, okay? It's not. While we were stuck in the house during the pandemic, the whole world was stuck in the house during the pandemic. This video comes across the news of this police officer kneeling on this white police officer kneeling on this black man's neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. And the whole world just stopped. Well, we had to stop anyway because we were stuck in the house. But it was like the way that it happened, it was like, it was done in such a way that everybody had to see it. That's kind of the sense that I got. Like, you didn't have a choice but to know about it because we were all stuck in the house. And the police officer was kneeling on his neck while he was handcuffed. Okay? And everybody was disgusted. We were all pretty damn disgusted. So they are currently in court now. Well, not they, because George Floyd lost his life. Derek Chauvin is in court now on trial for the murder of George Floyd. So the use of force is what's in question. The use of force. Because according to Minneapolis Police Department, what Derek Chauvin did was not necessarily against their rules, okay? Not necessarily. But training is in question as well as common sense, okay? Yes, this is your training, but how far does that is that supposed to go? Okay. When the threat is eliminated, the person is in handcuffs. Is that sort of force still necessary? That's the question. Okay. So it all started with a fraudulent $20 bill. George Floyd lost his life over a fraudulent $20 bill. Okay. So he went to the store, bought a pack of cigarettes with a fake $20 bill. The store clerks followed him outside, tried to get him to come back in and either return the cigarettes or give them a real $20 bill. He refused to do it, and they called the police on him. Now, I think the thing that a lot of people are missing about that part right there is, how many times have you been given a fraudulent bill and didn't know it? Is it possible that George Floyd did not know he had a fake $20 bill? And if that was his only 20, he probably said to himself, I'm not about to give this to you, because that $20 bill may have been the only $20 bill he had. Okay. And he may not have known it was fraudulent. Okay. Sure, it's a lot. It's a lot. So right now, it's a matter of blaming police training. Now, the prosecution, the people who are representing George Floyd, they brought in police officers and a sergeant that says what Derek Chauvin did is not what we train our officers to do. Okay. So there's already a problem. I'm sorry, Derek Chauvin's lawyer, that's the defense. The prosecution are defending defending George Floyd. So the prosecution is brought in officers. Okay, let's do this. Let's talk about each side. I'll tell you what each side is doing, what the prosecution is doing in court, and what the defense is doing in court, because it's a lot going on. Now, so back to the $20 bill. Before, I'm gonna just break down what each side is doing, but before we do that, so the $20 bill could have been fraudulent. He could not have known it was fraudulent, and it could have been his only one. Okay. Now, a lot of people got the nerve to ask the question, how was he able to talk and tell the police he could not breathe if he could not breathe? Okay. So they want to play a game of semantics and say, if George Floyd could not breathe, how was he able to talk and say, I can't breathe? Because when you can't breathe, you can't talk, right? Well, clearly there's a difference between I can't breathe and if you continue taking my breath away, you're going to make it so I'm not breathing and I won't be able to tell your ass that I can't breathe. If you've ever been choked, even for 2-3 seconds, everything in your body tries to breathe, even your fingertips, okay? Your whole being is in your breath. I don't give a damn what you got going on. Everything about you resides in your ability to inhale and exhale. You could go without eyes. You could even go without a nose. You could go without ears. You could go without legs. You go without arms. It's a whole lot of stuff you could go without, but you cannot go without the ability to freaking breathe. And I find it so dumb when people say, well, if he couldn't breathe, how was he talking? You know what the hell you know what that means. If you've ever been choked, you can talk. It means I'm struggling to breathe. I'm struggling to breathe. It's not that he couldn't breathe, it's that he felt the life leaving his body. Yes. Period. Period. You're making it hard for me to breathe. Okay. And how the hell else can you signal that the life is leaving your body unless you say the words, I can't breathe? Child. Anyway, so here are the open. So I'm going to tell you what the prosecution is saying. Okay. These are the people who are fighting for the deceased George Floyd. Their argument is the officer, he would not let up. That's their argument. George Floyd was in handcuffs. He was no longer a threat. He was detained. He could not breathe, and the officers still wouldn't let up. And they played the video, they didn't play the whole 9 minutes in court. They only played a little over 8 minutes of the 9-minute and 20-second video. The officer knelt on George Floyd for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. In court, they only played like 8 minutes of it, okay? And the prosecutor kept repeating that he wouldn't let up. And he didn't get up. So in essence, he's saying he didn't stop the pressure and he wouldn't get up. I mean, he didn't even have to get all the way up to release some of the pressure, right? Right. So the prosecution is trying to get the jury to see, not only did he not stop the pressure, but he stayed on him. So this was an intentional act. And look how long it lasted. 9 minutes and 29 seconds. That's a long time. That's a long ass time. Okay. So basically the prosecution is letting the jury know this was not a split-second decision. And that's important. It's important in court for the jury, for your whatever you're being charged with. There is a difference in punishment when you have a split-second decision versus a decision that took you 9 minutes and 29 seconds to make. Hey, December, baby. Oh, we like this original content, honey. Hey, Buttercup. Hey, Kimberly Rose. Shout out to the chat. Thank y'all for kicking it with me tonight, honey. So that's what the prosecution is proving. This was not a split-second decision. This was intentional. And the fact that the officer had that funky smirk on his face. He had that smirk on his face with his hands in his pocket while he murdered George Floyd. That's exactly what we witnessed. What we witnessed was a murder. This is my opinion. This is my opinion. And hopefully the jury, my peers that they selected, feel the same way I feel. But that's what we witnessed, a murder. And we got to see it in real time. From the moment the man was alive all the way until his life was taken from him. And it was all done by an officer that was kneeling with his hands in his pocket and a smirk on his face. Now, Derek Chauvin is in court, but you really can't see any of his facial expressions because of these damn masks. Okay? So while they're playing the video of him kneeling on George Floyd, the camera keeps going on his face, but he looks normal because most of this is covered. It's covered. And that's very unfortunate for me. I'm sure he loves it. I'm sure he can appreciate that his facial expressions can't be detected by the jury. But I would love to see if he has that same smirk on his face. Nevertheless, so then the defense. So the prosecution is stating the obvious. The prosecution is stating the obvious, what we all set up and watch, what we all sat back and watch. Now, the defense, on the other hand, the problem that they're going to have in their uphill battle is that video. That video came out before this trial started. And so because we saw that video, people have already formed their opinions about how they feel. I refuse to watch the trial. Chauvin intentionally killed George Floyd. I agree. The defense is trying to say that it was meth. Yes. Hey, Corey. Hey, Brown Sugar. So they have an uphill battle because we all sat and watched that video. Okay. So now they have to convince the jury that what we saw on that video is not all that happened, and that there is more to the story, and that if we knew the details of the rest of the story, we would feel differently. But more importantly, what matters in court is creating reasonable doubt. Reasonable doubt. And the defense, the lawyers for Derek Chauvin, are attempting to create a strong defense for reasonable doubt. In other words, yeah, we know you saw that video. We know you saw that, but okay. So what they did was showed what happened that led up to the incident that we all watched. So they're trying to show that when George Floyd went to the store with that first of all, he was fraudulent. Okay, this is what they're trying to say. George Floyd was fraudulent, not to be trusted. He had a fake $20 bill, number one. Number two, George Floyd was on drugs. Okay, so of course, the average working person sitting on a jury is automatically, we automatically associate drug addicts with certain things. Okay, it kind of takes it to another place when you find out a person is an addict. I'm just saying, because most addicts are not trustworthy. They'll do things that are illegal. We wouldn't put having a fake $20 bill past an addict. It's certain things like that. So that's where they're coming from. Let me see. What else are they trying to say? What else are they trying to say? I know I didn't delete that fast. Oh, okay. Now, Derek Chauvin's lawyers are really, really slick because they are using a lot of reverse psychology. Okay. Now, although we watched the video, they're telling us use common sense. They told the jury, excuse me, Derek Chauvin's lawyers is telling the courtroom, y'all use common sense. And I'm saying to myself, well, if we're using common sense, then we don't need to be here. If we're going to use common sense, we don't need these proceedings, because common sense tells us this man clearly killed George Floyd. Why are we here? Why are tax dollars being spent on this mess? That's what common sense will say. So they're using a lot of reverse psychology, and they're actually putting George Floyd's death on George Floyd. Now they're talking as if what Derek Chauvin did was appropriate. Okay. And they will not acknowledge how horrific the video is. Derek Chauvin's lawyers I believe are making a mistake in this area specifically by not acknowledging how terrible that video is. Yes, he does. He needs to be in jail. They will not acknowledge how bad the video is. And it's like, you kind of have to do that because most people are feeling that. If you want some sort of credibility, you can't skip the obvious. They refuse to acknowledge the video, and they are putting all of the blame on George Floyd. So they've called in several witnesses. Okay, we're talking about what's been going on, across several days of this trial. They've called in several witnesses. The witnesses are very emotional. There were witnesses at the scene who have now been called into court, who were there when it was happening, begging the officer to get off of George Floyd. They begged him, okay? And he didn't do it. There were people at the scene begging the officers, check his pulse, okay? And the officer wouldn't do it. Hey, sweetie. He had a beef with him prior. And I'm tripping that that's not coming up, sweet heat. I am really tripping that this prior knowledge of George Floyd, him and Derek Chauvin's connection. I guess they worked at a bar, or the officer was a bouncer part-time at a bar and knew George Floyd. Whatever it was, this was not their first encounter. This encounter was not the officers and George Floyd's first encounter, and I'm very shocked that's not coming up, number one. Another thing I'm shocked that's not happening is, where are the other officers that participated in George Floyd's murder? Why aren't they on trial? Because you got to remember, one officer, Derek Chauvin, was on his neck, and there was another officer on his back. And they're not on trial. It's a lot of fugazi, whole lot of fugazi BS going on. Okay. Who else? So they were begging the officer to get off of George Floyd, and he would not do it. There was a teenager and a 9-year-old little girl on the scene that watched George Floyd's murder. They were there. Imagine a 9-year-old little girl was out there. This man was so diabolical that he continued to kill this man in front of this 9-year-old. And it was a teenager rather. Another witness called the police on the police. Another witness on the scene called the police on Derek Chauvin. And they played an audio because he testified in court as well. They played an audio, and he had called, when he called the police, standing there on the scene, he called the police on Derek Chauvin. In the audio, he called the police bums 13 times. Those people that sat there and had to watch this happen were frustrated. They couldn't believe it. And now they're traumatized. So the guy that called in to the 911 center to call on Derek Chauvin, when he called the police bums 13 times in the audio, the defense tried to paint him as angry. And the man told him, I was not angry. I was pleading for life. I was witnessing a murder. Okay? There was an off-duty EMT worker. She was out there begging to help George Floyd, and she was denied. She also testified she was very emotional. So for her to be a person who was trained to save lives, she was trained to save lives, and now have to witness a life being taken, she was also very emotional. Okay. Now, the defense is also saying, not only are they saying that George Floyd was on drugs, they're also saying that They were distracted by the crowd of people who we just talked about. All of the people who were screaming out, get off him, check his pulse, he can't breathe, stop. People just outraged, people crying. They are trying to say that the police officers became distracted by the crowd because the crowd then became a threat. Okay. So while they're kneeling on George Floyd with his hands behind his back, they're also trying to watch this crowd that want to jump on them and beat the hell out of them because they are forced to witness this murder. I don't want to skip none. Now, George Floyd's girlfriend testified too, right? And she testified that she did testify that they were on oxycodone. She says that they became pill addicted when they both experienced back injuries, and the pills were initially prescribed to them by a doctor, and then they became addicted to the pills. And they would have to go on the street and buy them. Okay. And unfortunately, that is the story of a whole lot of people. Regular people, blue collar, white collar, just regular hardworking people. They have an injury, they get prescribed medication, and then they get addicted. That's where we get the whole opioid crisis. The girlfriend said he called her mama. Oh, Mrs. Charles. So is that why he was calling for his mama? We thought he was calling for his biological mama. You think he was calling for his girlfriend? Oh my God, I didn't know the officer Tal assaulted the store workers who called the police on George Floyd. Oxycodone is Percocet. Okay. So that is unfortunately, that is the experience of a lot of people. So now normally in a murder trial, you don't put your client on the stand. Okay. It's not normally the right thing to do, the smart thing to do, the strategic thing to do, to put your client on the stand. In other words, it would not be smart for Derek Chauvin's lawyers to put him on a stand. They get to ask him questions, but the problem is in cross-examination, will he get tripped up and pop himself? Okay. And in court, that's the worst case scenario. So normally he's not. So he's more than likely not going to testify in his trial because the prosecution will get a chance to rip his ass apart. Now, the reasonable doubt issue that we have, the reason I named this Derek Chauvin may go free is because of this. All the prosecution has to do is create enough reasonable doubt and create a case that George Floyd's death was caused by his drug use. On the day that George Floyd was arrested, he did have several drugs in his system. Let me see. Did I take a picture of all the drugs that were in his system? And what they're saying is the amount of drugs that George Floyd had in his system would have killed anybody. This is what they're trying to say. This is what they're trying to say. That he has so many drugs in his system that it was so many, it would have killed anyone. Did I take a picture? No, I didn't even take a picture. But he did have several different types of drugs in his system. And they're trying to say that drug use and a heart or health problems, I think they tried to say a heart attack, but drug use and health problems caused his death and not the knee to his neck. Okay. Now, unfortunately for them, the defense they've called in experts that have said, no, sir, his breathing was restricted, and that's what caused his death. Okay. Also, something that came out during the trial was the police vehicle. They found drugs in the back of the police car that George Floyd was arrested in. And on the drugs had George Floyd's DNA. So they're saying that he spit out drugs too in the back of the police car. The thing about that is they found it 6 months after he was arrested. Did someone say he has C-19? I don't know. I didn't hear that one. That woman yesterday said the drugs in his system wasn't enough. Yep. That's what they're alleging. Okay. Now here's the problem with that though. We just saw an example. Rest in peace, DMX. Rest in peace to DMX. Reports came out that DMX had a drug overdose, right? What preceded? This is crazy, Fi. Yeah, Camille, it is. What preceded after DMX's drug overdose? I'll wait. Uh-oh, bloop. Get into it. Get into it. Get into it. Okay. George Floyd he didn't go into a coma. That's normally what happens. And the problem is it only takes one, and yes, loss of oxygen, yes. Heart attack, yes. The problem with this is it only takes one juror. It only takes one juror out of all 12, just one, to believe that there is a possibility that drugs caused George Floyd's death. Yeah, he didn't have a heart attack. He didn't go into a coma. None of that. So how was it an OD? How did he OD? And so it only takes one juror to believe that he died of a drug overdose. Just one. And that's the problem. Okay? Because trust and believe me, the defense is laying it out thick. But so is the prosecution. But this is not the open shut case that many of us thought it would be, because we saw the video, but it's not looking like it's so cut and dry anymore. The problem that I also have is the officer laid on George Floyd three whole minutes after he was already dead. The man, first of all, was handcuffed behind his back. You got your knee in his neck. The other officer got his knee in his back. He's begging and pleading. If he's resisting, it's because he can't freaking breathe. But he's not a threat. And they even talked about the levels of force that you got to use for different situations and how over time that changes. Once someone is handcuffed, you don't need the same level of force that you may have needed before you handcuffed them. And there was an expert that came in that spoke so eloquently yesterday. He came in and really broke down how the whole time, first of all, the handcuffs were like this long, okay? George Floyd is bigger than this condo, okay? But the handcuffs that were behind his back, the length were like this long. So you got this big, tall man with these little ass handcuffs on, and his hands got to be close together. They had this expert come in and talk about how many ways his hands kept getting twisted and turned and pushed against his body, and how he was all the pressure from the knee on his back was already restricting his lungs. And each time they would twist him or he'd move a certain way to catch some sort of air, it would cause further problems either on the left side of his body or the right side of his body. So there was no hope for him. There was no way. With a body full of drugs or not. Somebody said, why don't they just do something very simple and put Derek Chauvin ass in handcuffs and let an officer kneel on his neck and kneel on his back without any drugs in his system for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, and we'll see if he makes it. If he makes it, then it was the drugs. A lot of people that's watching, as we're watching this, are starting to become concerned that justice will not be served, because the way that this is going, number one, and number two, because we have so many examples of Black people being killed by the police and justice not being served, and the officers not getting any jail time. Hashtag Breonna Taylor. The only officer that went to jail was the one that missed in the Breonna Taylor case. Breonna Taylor's murderer didn't go to jail. The only one that got in trouble was the one that shot and missed. So it's hard for us to feel confident in justice when we have so many examples of them playing in our face. So we're watching, and a lot of people don't want to admit that it's about race, but it definitely is. It's about race in this country. It is. Because a lot of people, the first of all, for Derek Chauvin to even be on trial for this is a smack in the face. Do you know how many times they arrest people and lock them up and that be the end of that shit? They are giving this, I mean, with the evidence that they have, it's not like they're trying to figure out. This is not a who did it. This is not a who did it. They know who done it. So it's like, what are we doing? You have his sergeant telling you this is not what we trained them to do. So that throws that right on out the window. They cannot find a police officer to testify that will say this was appropriate. So then why we keep, where we going? What happened? And the whole world is watching, and this verdict matters. Okay, so it matters to Black people, but it matters to a lot of people. If Derek Chauvin gets off, first of all, I don't believe this is going to be a very long trial. Okay, I think they were on like day 9 or something. I think they're on like day 9. First of all, I don't think this trial is going to go past 2 weeks. I really don't. I really feel like we're going to have closing statements probably late next week. If this man gets off, listen, let me just tell you this. I hope you guys have stocked up already on your water, your canned goods, your meats, okay, your fresh fruit and vegetables. I hope you guys have stocked up. I would rather be safe than sorry. The way gun sales have gone up in this country since the Rona, there are a lot of people ready to fight, a lot of people ready to go to war, and a lot of people just, they ready, okay? If this man gets off for this murder that we all sat and watched, it's going the F down, okay? So I would just advise you it's to just be better safe than sorry. I'm just saying. It's a mess. Civil unrest, yes. It's gonna be not good. Not good. Most definitely. Most definitely. Yeah. And again, it only takes one juror to say, you know what? There was a lot of drugs. I can't say it wasn't the drugs. That's all it takes. So shout out to Babe Nation. Thank you guys so much for attending. Hey, Tube Talks. Hey, The Smart Show. I appreciate you guys so much for entertaining me tonight. Yes, be prepared. Be prepared. Yes. Thank you guys for entertaining me tonight. Shout out to Babe Nation. I love y'all. I hope you guys have a restful night, honey. Thank you guys so much. I will see you guys soon. Peace. Good night, Corey. Good night, mods.